Hello, I'm Toycat, and perhaps the best understood term, geographically speaking, is island. This is because it's easy to understand. If you have a piece of land and it's fully surrounded by water, then that is an island. It can be big, it can be medium, it can be small, but as long as it is fully surrounded, geographically speaking, it's an island. Now, this gets made messy by the way that humans call things islands when they're not. I'm sorry, Island McGee, but if you're connected by even a small stretch of land, that makes you a peninsula. But interestingly, there are lots of places that are not islands geographically, but are made islands by how humans interact with them, and there are three big reasons this can be true. The first is international relations, the second is culture, and the third is the weird world of what we're going to call, for the sake of this video, infrastructure. Let's go into the three ways that places can be islands despite not being islands by starting with the reverse. Because did you know Denmark is made up of a bunch of different islands, but the biggest of these is Zealand, or Sjælland, if you want to put that in Danish script, and a lot of people assume that this is the island that New Zealand is named after, but actually they're named after Zeeland from the Netherlands. Anyway, but this island is a big island right here, but even though it's an island in terms of geography, effectively it's not, because it's linked to Sweden by a road and rail bridge. It's a very impressive road and rail bridge too. It's linked to the rest of Denmark by a series of bridges. Even fairly small islands will have a roadway to get there, and so as a result, even though technically the capital of Denmark is on an island, it's effectively not. And going even further, Great Britain is an island that has a ludicrous number of people on it that hasn't actually been an island. Even though we wanted to stay an island during those World War II times, we did decide to eventually build a rail bridge to France, and you can put your car on it. Therefore, we are connected to mainland Europe via land, even though we're an island. And so those are the cases of the reverse to kind of get you in the mood for what we're going for here, because now let's talk about the inverse, places that really aren't islands, but actually sort of are. The most famous example is South Korea. You cannot go from South Korea to North Korea, like even ignoring the the difficulties in getting a visa. So North Korea does not accept the idea that you're just going through North Korea to get to China, and China will not let you go through North Korea to get to South Korea. This is a shame because they are both very developed economies on either side of North Korea, but as you might know, they're a bit of a hermit kingdom, and so as a result, South Korea is a peninsula that effectively functions like an island. If you want to get there, you have to come in via plane, or in some rare cases, boat, and as a result, we have this weird situation of a place that is actually, it's actually a full piece of land, it's a fully connected piece of Asia, but culturally, and every other way of speaking, South Korea is an island. Isn't that fun? The same is true for lots of interesting parts of the world, but let's go into the very most interesting. People love to talk about this all the time in very reasonable ways, but when we're talking about both Palestine and Israel, these are both places that are islands. Arguably, Palestine is an island because of Israel, and arguably, Israel is an island because of what's going on in Palestine, but there is a weird situation where everything that comes into these places has to come in usually by boat or air. It's something like 97% of food comes in that way because the road borders around them are not necessarily that open. This is very slowly changing as more countries recognize Israel in the region, and so direct flights start, and so eventually the borders will open, but that's one of those slow peace processes that will take most of this century, I would guess, and so as a result, right now, these are effectively islands, and isn't that fun? I guess not if you live there. But yeah, there are lots of other places that politically work this way, but in mild niche circumstances. So let's take, for example, Point Roberts. This is one of my favorite parts of the world. It's a Canadian Vancouver suburb that is inside of the United States, or you might call it a tiny town that is very close to Vancouver, but it means that it's a island. When the border shut during COVID, because we all said that, yep, COVID, when it crosses a border, that's when it gets dangerous. It can freely move around anywhere except international borders. That's when it becomes a real disease vector. And so when we shut down borders as the geniuses we were, and the pathologist experts that we said we were all deciding to be, Point Roberts became disconnected, and they had to start a ferry service from Point Roberts down to over here, because otherwise there was no way for the residents to get to a grocery store. This is one of the interesting realities of international borders, is at any point, if they become less friendly, not that the US and Canada have any knowledge or experience of that, but if at any point they become less friendly, then you can become an island if the only way you can access somewhere is via the rest of it. During, I believe Canada had some big floods around here, and so a lot of these towns that previously had this road that just runs close to the US, this road got flooded, and so as a result, their closest grocery store was in America, and thankfully, America actually opened the border for those reasons in particular, and there's lots of cases where, like, but if they didn't, they would be living on an island, and isn't that interesting? So the second reason that you can be a island, even though you're not an island, is kind of via culture. This is to say that if you look at the culture from Germany to Belgium, or from Poland to Czechia, etc., etc., you kind of get a culture that blends slowly. That is to say, Polish people get a little bit more Czech, and Czech people get a little bit more Polish. There's not even though borders exist, it's not that you suddenly cross it and it's like, whoa, everyone here is incredibly Polish, and then it stays exactly the same amount of Polish across the country. This is something I talk about a lot on this channel, but what's interesting is when it comes to Moldova, Moldova is a part of what used to be Romanian territory that was split off to become a part of the USSR, and most of Moldova is now pretty happy with its independence, but not Transnistria. Transnistria is a small part of it that got really, I swear to God, I'm going to read this to you straight from the Wikipedia page. Following Russia's annexation in Crimea in 2014, hopes that Transnistria, that Russia would annex its territory grew as well. This is a part of Europe, like while the rest of Europe is here, like, my God, our existential threat is that Russia might invade any day. This part of Europe is like, oh, come on, Russia, you can get to us. You've not got that much of Ukraine to go through. You could invade us, daddy. That is what the Transnistrians are saying, and as ridiculous as that sounds, it's what's happening. And in the inverse case, we have this little blob of Russia, Kaliningrad, which is, a former German/Polish territory, Königsberg. But what's interesting about it is the fact that, yeah, there is a piece of Russia that is fully surrounded by Europe, and I would suspect that the big reason why Russia is maybe a little bit more bearish on attacking NATO and the EU than they otherwise would be is because immediately, if Russia wanted to take Estonia, they'd be losing this, is the simple way to put that. And I actually had a fun idea that, like, one day when everything does fall apart, this would be a pretty cool, in the same way like America has DC, Europe could use this as like a European version of DC, right? Like a neutral, not part of any country territory, because everyone who lives, usually there's a big debate about, well, if you move people from one place to another, that's considered to be borderline genocidal, but they literally already moved all the people out of there very peacefully under a 24-hour duress, and so if you did it again, it's not like this is natural Russian territory. You could make it a European, harmony place and put a real capital there. No offense to Brussels. Speaking of no offense to Brussels, the third reason that a place can become an island, unintentionally, is infrastructure. And there's lots of examples of this, literally too many to name, but let's try and think of an easy example for you. Canada. Big country, really, really big country, one of the biggest on the planet, not that many people. What does that result in? Well, even if you go to Yellowknife, which is the capital of the Northwest Territories, or the biggest city at least, I'm pretty sure it's the capital, but if you go to Yellowknife via the airport, because that's the only way you're getting in, you could theoretically drive home. If you wanted to drive from Yellowknife to Ottawa, as, like you might want to do to see your nation's capital, it would be Google is struggling, but a 50-hour drive, and not only would your destination be in a different time zone, but also it looks like the road is closed, so you can't actually do that right now. I'm guessing maybe for the winter, but there is at least a theoretical connection between this and the rest of the country. But when you get to like Nunavut, or when you get to most of the settlements that the native people have up here, there isn't a road connection between it and the rest of Canada. So Baker Lake over here is a beautiful little town where they've got penguins, and good luck driving from there to... I'll put it in the directions just to find out, actually. Can we drive from here to Ottawa? The answer is no. Can we take the train? It's not even going to pretend that we can. We could theoretically walk it. No, we couldn't walk it or take the bike. So instead, we must fly, and so... Oh, there's not even flights there. Non-military flights. But in effect, it is an island that is made by infrastructure. One of my favorite examples of this is in Peru. This is a giant place. I think it's got hundreds of thousands of people living here. I'll throw the population on screen. But Iquitos in Peru is just not connected to the rest of Peru. You can, if you look at it here on a map, you can see there's like a road out of the village, and if you follow that road, it takes you to this little town. And it's not that you have to get on a ferry after that point, it's that there's nothing on the other side of the river. If you follow the road north, you can see like, okay, we can sort of follow this like pathway through the trees, and if you follow the pathway through the trees, it eventually takes you to a beautiful little Comunidad de Independencia, which is nice, a little tourist attraction, and then eventually it takes you to Barrio Florida, and then it's just gone. You cannot get from there to the rest of Peru. It is just a little island that exists in the middle of the country, and this is just true for so many parts of the planet. One of my favorite examples, because it's just so huge, is this part of Russia. The far eastern edge, there's just one of the oblasts of Russia. It's just out here with a few territories down here in the south, and then some islands that come off that. But in terms of actually connecting it, despite it being a huge peninsula, well, there's nothing that goes on this peninsula. There's no road, there's no rail route. And so interestingly, there are better connections from Russia to North Korea than there are from Russia to the little towns that exist over here. And so if you live in Malka, I'm very sorry, but I don't imagine you're watching this video, because you live on an island. It might not look like you do on a map, but effectively, until that infrastructure is built, you do. But then that makes the interesting question of like, well, if you have to build infrastructure, if you have to build a ridiculous highway to connect this to the rest of Russia, that would be worthwhile. It's effectively the same as the economic benefit that places like the Faroe Islands get. The Faroe Islands are a really economically developed, for their size, piece of Norway, I think they technically are. No, it's going to be Denmark. So they're a really well-connected part of Denmark, to tie this into the intro here. So the Faroe Islands are a really connected part of Denmark. I think they used to be Norwegian, but different point for a different time. Anyway, but because they're a part of Denmark, they realized, like, yeah, it's worth spending the ludicrous number of billions to connect everywhere by bridge. You toll that place, and so not only do you make money from the bridge, but then also you can have economic activity. People would come into the capital to spend some money they otherwise wouldn't, and people can now live out there, and it frees up housing supply, basically. But they spent a ludicrous amount of money, and it makes sense. And so countries could make this infrastructure investment to take places in their own country and build it. You know, Peru could connect Lima all the way up here to Iquitos via a ridiculously expensive high-speed train or something. And would it be worthwhile? In the short term, probably not, but it's the sort of thing that is like, you know, basically one of the things we are doing as humans through our development is making the world a more connected place. We are one big little town now, I guess you could say, relative to 100 years ago, and definitely relative to 1,000 years ago, and so as a result, even though there are lots of places that are effectively islands now, there are lots of these are going to be sealed up over the next few dozens or hundreds of years, and even more interestingly, more places that are currently islands will one day not be. Places like Ireland, or places like, most bizarrely of all, I think, Sicily. But like, lots of these places are eventually going to be linked up, because eventually it will make sense to do so. And isn't that nice? I think it is. Anyway, with that said, I hope you'll enjoy this video. If you like the geography, make sure to, I don't know, I don't actually care. Have a good day. Second channel, don't care. Bye.